So hello everybody, good morning. Or for many of you joining us from other regions outside of Europe, I guess it could be a good afternoon, a good evening, or maybe even an extremely early good morning. But whatever time it is for you, a very warm welcome to all of you to the 5th annual edition of the European 5G Conference. My name is Dan Kraft, and on behalf of everyone at Forum Europe, I'd like to say how great it is to have you all with us here today. This is the first time that we've held this event as a virtual conference. Last year's event was in February, and we just managed to squeeze it in as a physical event before the start of lockdown. In fact, I think for those of you who maybe joined the stage here a few minutes early this morning, you might have seen the highlights video from that event, from last year's event being shown. But the world of physical events, of course, seems a long way away now, and for all of us, instead, the virtual format that we are using today has, of course, become the norm. But one of the benefits that you do find with virtual events is that they actually become more accessible to a far wider audience, both in terms of numbers and geographical spread. And I think the event today is a great example of that. I think at the last count, we have over 1,500 people registered to attend the event, participating from 114 different countries around the world. And you can see on the map next to me the spread, not just in Europe, but throughout the world of participants at the event. So once again, it's really fantastic to have you all here with us, and we're looking forward to 3 days of debate, discussion, and of interaction as well. So please do feel free to get involved using the chat feature, which I'll be talking about a little bit more in a second. In terms of how the event is going to work, the program is spread out a little bit more than it normally would be in a physical environment. So instead of the normal 2 full days of conference, we are holding it over 3 partial days. So it's today, tomorrow, and Thursday. And over these 3 days, we're going to be seeing a mix of panel discussions, presentations, interactive sessions, demonstrations, exhibition areas, and importantly, one-to-one networking rooms as well. And we've actually even got some live music coming your way during our closing reception on Thursday afternoon, which is going to be hosted by Awea. So we're looking forward to that as well. So in a second, we're going to be kicking off things with our keynote and opening session. But before we did that, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. So first of all, I wanted to say a big thank you to all of our sponsors and partner organizations for the support of this event. You'll see all the logos on the screen next to me now. We really are grateful for the support of each and every one of you. I think I've said it before at other events, but to say it again now, it really is true. Without all of you, these events would not be possible. So thank you very much. As I said, we really do appreciate that. Next, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the networking and interactive areas of the platform, because we've actually recently introduced some brand new features, particularly in the networking side of things. So for those of you who've even attended our events or used the platform before, just wanted to outline how it now works with regards to how you can network and connect with your fellow attendees during the event. So there's actually 2 ways on the platform that you can network. The first way you'll see on the bar on the left-hand side, a networking icon, and we'll be inviting you during specific times on the program to go to that networking area. And in there, you'll be able to click a button to connect, and you'll be randomly matched with another attendee who's at the event. When you're there, when you meet with them, you'll have 3 minutes or so to chat, and then you can decide whether or not you want to virtually exchange business cards, exchange contact details, and those contact details will be emailed to you afterwards if you wanted to do that. Secondly, is the more targeted networking area on the platform that we have. So that you can find that using the People tab on the right-hand side of the screen. So you need to go into the Event tab, and then under that, you'll find People, which will give you the list of who's attending. You can scroll to see who is participating at the event. And then you can actually click on individual people to send them private messages, to send them private text messages. And you can also invite them to join you for a call straight away. Or alternatively, the new function that we have now introduced, you can actually suggest another time during the day during the 3 days of the event to schedule a video call with them. And you can invite them and up to 4 other participants to join you during some time that's convenient during the course of the event. So please do make use of that and try and connect with as many people as you can during the conference. I also wanted to mention the expo area. So you can see again on the left-hand side, we have an expo area. Please do browse the different stands that we have there. We have a number of our sponsors and partners who are exhibiting. We have Broadcast Network Europe, Ericsson, ASOA, Awea, LeMay Yates Associates, SES, and Specure. So please do visit that area, and you can see the different videos, presentations, materials and things that they are exhibiting there. Finally, I wanted to mention 2 areas that you can go to get more information. So first of all of the presentations that we have that are being made during the conference are going to be made available for you to download afterwards. You can find a link to this in the reception area of the site, and you can also visit presentations, you can bit.ly, it's a bit.ly link, so visit the link bit.ly/EU5G21. So you'll be sent that link, but the easiest way to find that is using the reception area and the link that's in there. So on to today. So we have a busy day ahead of us with the first day of proceedings. So first of all, we're going to be starting very shortly with a keynote presentation from Piers O'Donoghue, who is delighted is going to be joining us to give us an opening presentation from the Commission perspective. We then move straight on to the first session, which is going to be looking at the 5G Action Plan review, before we have a short break. So we have a lunch break then at 11:45. Following that, this afternoon, we're then back with session 2, which is going to be looking something that is a very topical issue at the moment, which is the investment opportunities and the funding that's available related to the EU recovery strategy. And then we have the first round of our showcase sessions. So those will be starting at 2:15, and I'll come back and give you some more information on those later on today. And then finally, we have session 3, which is at 3:45 to finish off the first day, which is going to be looking at the issue of digital sovereignty and looking maybe a little bit beyond 5G as well to B5G and maybe even 6G. So a very busy day ahead of us. So with that in mind, I think we better get started. So once again, I'd like to offer you all a very warm welcome to the event. And I would also like to welcome to the stage now the moderator for our first session. So Jeanette Stewart from Analysys Mason. So Jeanette, welcome. It's great to have you with us, and really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and the thoughts of Piers on the first panel. So over to you.
Thank you, Dan, and good morning, everybody. I'm Jeanette Stewart from Analysys Mason. We are delighted to be sponsoring this event again today, as Dan has described. So Analysys Mason, if you're not aware of us, we are consulting and research specialists in telecoms, media and technology. We have been sponsoring these Forum Europe 5G events for several years during the physical events in Brussels, and we're delighted to be part of this virtual event this year. As Dan has described, I am going to be moderating the first session of the discussions today. We are going to be running through a very interesting selection of sessions throughout the course of today's discussions. I'm sure you will be aware that the European Commission has set ambitious objectives in the area of 5G. So one of the key issues we will be talking about this morning is revisiting the initial objectives, Europe's 5G Action Plan. The objective there is to make sure that Europe is a world leader in 5G, can achieve early 5G deployment. Obviously, in order to do that, and to successfully achieve those objectives, we need a strong market, we need strong supply side initiatives to make the investment in infrastructure, and we also need a strong market on the demand side to make sure that European consumers and businesses can reap the benefits of the 5G infrastructure. So with that in mind, I think we've got a very interesting panel session ahead. Leading into that, I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, who is Piers O'Donoghue from the European Commission. He is Director for Future Networks of DG Connect. So Piers, I will hand over to you now for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Good morning, everybody. And thank you to Forum Europe and to Dan for organizing this conference, which every year seems to come at a very timely moment. Gives us an opportunity to explain things, but also to hear from you about important milestones in the development of Europe's 5G rollout. This year, I'm going to talk a lot more about money than I would normally do, as Jeanette put it, in the context of needing to ensure the investment and deployment, because we're speaking today just a few days after the formal confirmation and adoption of the European Recovery and Resilience Plan, which is worth over 670 billion euros. So that formally came into force last Friday, and member states are now busily operating to submit their national implementation plans before the deadline of the 30th of April. So that's something I wanted to explain to you, as it is going to be very significant. It's a once-off opportunity to invest in digital technologies and infrastructures, and to ensure that 5G is, as we have always believed it can be, it's at the heart of driving all sectors of the economy, particularly in a period where we need these digital tools for economic recovery, for growth, for innovation, and future-proofing the European economy in terms of technology. But we're also a few weeks away from the publication by the Commission of the Digital Decade, which is what we are calling the digital roadmap or digital compass that was asked of us by the EU heads of government last October. And the objectives in the digital decade, they'll be important for shaping our ambitious plans all the way up until 2030. And they will be particularly relevant also in the context of possible adjustments to the 5G action plan. There's even another coincidence that's today is the publication of a joint European Investment Bank and Commission study on access to venture financing to accelerate 5G innovation on the demand side. And I'm glad to see that later in the day, Shiva Dustar, who's head of the division responsible at the EIB for the work done in this report, she will open the session on 5G investments. And I'd like to thank the EIB and Shiva for the great collaboration that we've had with our services in the context of that study. Now, last but definitely not least, the Commission is also today adopting a legislative proposal for the new public-private partnership on smart networks and services towards 6G. Now, that's a successor to our 5G PPP, the research vehicle which we had under the current framework. And the legislative proposal today is for a series of partnerships in various key sectors. But in 6G, we are creating a joint undertaking to implement research activities from the implementation of 5G and the preparations of 6G technology using the Horizon Europe financial vehicle, and with up to 900 million euros earmarked for that, which will be matched by the same amount through co-funding by the industry. And as well as operating that money, the joint undertaking will also coordinate the deployment projects for 5G under the Connecting Europe facility and other programs. So it will become the focal point for investment in 5G rollout, the development of advanced 5G, and research and innovation with regard to 6G in Europe. So now there'll be lots of opportunities throughout the day and over the next 2 days in this conference to address all of the topics in more detail. But I'd just like to deal with some of them that I've mentioned, particularly, first of all, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is the fund, the RRF, under which member states will be drawing up their recovery plans. And it's a huge once-off opportunity, as I've said. It represents more than 5 years of the entire EU budget as we're used to know it. And all of that money has to be committed within 2 years. So it's something that we need to do now. And within that, the EU has already targeted 20% of investments to go on digital technologies. That's about 130 billion euros. And of course, it goes without saying that that's the sort of public push that will redefine the investment dynamics in the EU connectivity, communications technologies, and telecom sectors. And of course, therefore, particularly 5G. Because a significant proportion of that 130 billion, about 40 billion at least, could be mobilized to finance connectivity in general. And the fact that network infrastructures are a key part of the proposition for digital transformation across the whole economy, it is one of the 7 flagship investment areas under the RRF. So we will now have at our fingertips the means, the financial means, to meet our ambitions with regards to rollout of advanced connectivity and to boost investment in fiber backhaul, and of course 5G infrastructure to meet all of our digital objectives. And of course, the member states have to step up now, and they have to translate the ambition into concrete investments in their national plans. As I've said, the deadline is the 30th of April, so that we can start spending the money immediately. The Commission will seek to approve those plans as quickly as possible after April, and they will become the basis for all of the financial commitments. So the plans as themselves, they don't have to define in great technical detail all the nuts and bolts of the projects that will come. Those will be worked out as they develop. But of course, we do have to have clear objectives and a framework for the projects, project definition, the objectives, and of course milestones, and even benchmarks and indicators to ensure that we are hitting our targets over the next 2 to 3 years. So the main challenge is to make the right choices now, but then to work with industry to ensure that all government agencies are working together. And this is crucial, particularly in 5G, to make sure that member states are working together. We are putting a lot of emphasis on cross-border projects, multi-country projects involving 5G corridors, cloud and edge technologies to ensure that Europe is joined up with the advanced connectivity that we need. So that's really a critical element, which is an echo of what was already set in the 5G action plan as objectives, to have uninterrupted 5G coverage along major transport paths by 2025. And this is a way of really now realizing that objective. And also those 5G corridors will become the arteries from which the capillaries of a much more dense 5G network will spread out across all of the territory of the European Union. So as you can imagine, the initiative has huge potential, because it is also a way of meeting our Green Deal and climate change objectives by reducing energy consumption in the transport field, for example, but also, of course, ensuring that we have much more modern communications technologies which are themselves aiming towards zero carbon. So it's a really good initiative which harnesses Europe's twin objectives of digital and green over the next few years. So another element is using the once-off opportunity of these major projects to harness the funding that we had already envisaged for 5G, for example, under the Connecting Europe facility, and acting as a focus for major infrastructure projects, which will seek to deploy the infrastructure on a large scale quickly, and then making it easier for industry partners to take over, and also to absorb some of the initial investment shock that was obviously proving a problem for our actors in the telco area in Europe. At the same time, we want to ensure that it is completely forward-looking and that it is integrated with a vision for edge computing in the future, where we will have edge cloud deployed together with 5G infrastructures in order to ensure that we have that compute facility, the capacity for all of the edge computing, for the AI technologies that will harness data being produced by the new digital technologies, and also then link in to the high performance computing facilities that we're also investing in, so that Europe really does have the full range, the full chain of compute capacity, leading right down to the edge where the data is produced or processed or managed, but where it is needed in real time by the user and by the use applications. So that's really the vision that we see with regard to investment in 5G. It's important that all stakeholders, including all of you in this audience, help to shape the agenda and the way that the investment is allocated, because we really want to ensure that there is synergy between this public investment and the private investment, which I will come back to in a moment. But there is one other element as well. By having this state involvement, by having such a critical economic development and economic security objective, we will be able to address some of the competition aspects and the market compliance issues that have sometimes been a problem in the past with regard to major investments in infrastructure such as 5G. We're working on clear notification procedures and a stringent process to ensure that it can be done and done quickly, that it is clear to all economic actors what is allowed and what needs to be notified. And we're considering new state aid exemptions for broadband, for corridors, as part of the review of what's called the General Block Exemption Regulation. All very important elements for both public but particularly private investors in this sector. At the same time, we want our ambition with 5G to actually match the potential of the funding. So another important ongoing activity is the 5G Action Plan, which has been running since 2016. So now it's time to assess the plan's adequacy. Is it fit for purpose? Looking in the context of recent technological development and market developments, and of course our evolving policy objectives. Now, the exact method or timing and scope of any review, those are still being examined, and they are very much related to the digital decade objectives, as I said earlier on. But it's very relevant for future network deployment right up to 2030. And while we don't necessarily have a precise agenda yet, my colleague Peter Stuckman will speak more about this in the next session. But in any case, we are thinking to complement the ongoing review of the action plan by conducting a survey, a technical survey from all stakeholders, including those in the vertical industries who are so important as users of the new 5G technologies, and as those who will have great need for the edge computing technologies that will be accompanying it. So that survey is again something that Peter will refer to. But as you know, we already collect data through the European 5G Observatory, and we will be seeking your views on how we can adjust the 5G Action Plan, extend its scope and its ambition in order to ensure that we deliver quickly right across Europe. So that's something that we will be talking about today, but also we hope to have further clarity when the Commission adopts the digital decade communication in 5 or 6 weeks' time. But going back to money, I can't get away from it. Investments, that is obviously the biggest challenge for implementation of the 5G Action Plan, for meeting the 5G strategy. It's the investment gap. Now, I've talked about the public funds. The RRF is once off, plus the other vehicles, funding vehicles that we'd imagine. But we know, and we're very realistic about this, is that the challenge is much bigger than just filling in the hole with public investments. That actually wouldn't be possible. The RRF itself will not be enough. Most of the investment needs to come from the private investors. And those investors can only do so with confidence if there is a sustainable economic model for 5G, clear user demand, and support for the infrastructure, as well as for the regulatory environment. So we have to develop here in Europe, on the basis of the new economic models, using the vertical industries as key leaders in the demand side, is then to reflect on that in the way in which we build out the networks. We have to look at the wider economic and societal benefit that will come from the efforts in order to ensure future competitiveness, but also to ensure that there is not a further digital divide, including, for example, SMEs operating in non-urban areas. So up until now, when we have looked at the ecosystem approach, we have sought to build governance frameworks to ensure that those most involved in these ecosystems are in fact at the heart of any design and control. And that is something which we seek to continue to do with regard to 5G. We already have been developing with stakeholders the so-called 5G strategic deployment agenda, and already focusing in 2 areas, in connected and automated mobility, in the context of 5G corridors, and a similar activity for connected trains. But of course, that approach will extend into other areas as 5G actually is rolled out. That approach helps to accelerate cooperation between the key players. It paves the way for proper governance systems. So what do I say governance? Well, if you look, for example, at 5G corridors, particularly those crossing borders, we have to ensure that there is a coherent, transparent, but also simple model for who owns, who runs, and who can access these infrastrucures. So we intend to continue and to intensify this approach in additional sectors, as I've said. But the strategic agenda, that, as I said, seeks to coordinate the stakeholders, especially for vertical use cases and applications. And the supply, of course, has to meet the demand. And that is why we need to look at venture financing and the role that that has to play in meeting the investment gap. So we have to ensure that we are stimulating innovation on the demand side, showing sectors, just as we're doing in our large-scale pilots in the domain of Internet of Things, showing the sectors how these technologies, IoT joined up with edge computing and 5G, will actually drive massive change and productivity gains across all sectors, whether it's agri-food, transport itself, manufacturing, health, and so on and so on. Of course, there are risks involved in this process. It's more than just infrastructure planning, but the risk profile is the thing that's different. And of course, what we need to do is to ensure that there is clarity for the investor community with regard to the environment in which these developments take place. And that's why, as I said already, that the presentation that Shiva Dustar will make later today will be very important, because we are in Europe at a disadvantage when it comes to access to financing for innovative connectivity solutions and those solutions that will pull in new user use cases. So as well as the investor vision of 5G, which is predominantly national, we need to ensure that there is a European perspective so that we're not missing the potential of achieving European scale. And that's why, once again, we at our level are putting such an emphasis on the cross-border dimension to a lot of this investment, so that we show that there is one single market which can provide a very interesting investment case rather than a whole separate number of national markets. So that is why I can say already that the Commission will now consider the recommendations of the EIB study as we come to form a vision for EU-level venture financing for 5G. So there you are. I've spoken a lot about money, perhaps not as much about other issues that you would like, but a number of my colleagues will be joining the conference over today and the next 2 days, in which we will be able to explain in more detail our views on regulatory issues and of course on the technology issues as 5G develops and as it is deployed. But what I wanted to do was just finally, in closing, address you, the users and stakeholders. You have a very important role in helping us through our survey, but in continuing to play a key role in the 3 priority issues that I've raised, which is the implementation of the resilience and the recovery funds, the digital decade objectives, and of course the review of the 5G action plan, where we need to address investment challenges, but we need to address the practicalities, the realities of the markets in which you operate, either as a provider or as a user or as a technology player. And that is a key issue, that we want to do this with the stakeholders, with the communities, in order to ensure that our investment plans and our rollout actions are as realistic and as viable as possible. So I hope that the conference that we have, with thanks to Forum Europe, will really contribute to advancing the debate on all of the topics, just at a moment when we actually have at our disposal the tools, the levers to make 5G happen in Europe now. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Piers. Well, I think the audience will probably agree that was a very inspiring presentation you've given. Obviously, a number of important initiatives all coming at the same time, which is great. The 5G action plan is the topic of the next session, so let's set that aside for just now. And perhaps if you've got a few moments, have you just answered a few questions? Yeah. Let's maybe just focus on the sort of money aspects of it as you've described there. So first question, you did mention, pulling in new users into 5G, and that's, potentially where some of the real value is unlocked. One of the questions from the audience is, there's been an assumption that 5G is driven entirely by conventional MNOs, or has there been an assumption? But the question is, if that is an assumption, do we see that changing given the increased industrial use of 5G, enterprises, indoor usage, exactly where that new value lies? So I think the question is around the value chain and the role of sort of alternative players as well.
Well, thank you. We could have a long debate as to who or what we were assuming in the past. I think what is more important in the first part of that question is to talk about conventional MNOs. This is a real opportunity for Europe's MNOs to break from the mold and to reassess their business plans and to sort of adapt to what will be a very different market and a very different demand environment in our view. But that's no secret, and it's not as radical as it may sound in me saying it, because for 5 years at least, an awful lot of the efforts that we made with the 5G PPP in research, but also then in the work on investment and rollout, has been focused on the industry use cases. And of course has therefore led to the involvement of new actors, or actors, shall we say, that we didn't necessarily previously associate with communications network technologies or services for that matter. But yes, I mentioned some of the sectors. If you just take manufacturing, obviously there are companies which have been looking actively at deploying their own on-campus networks and the use of technologies with service providers who bypass to a certain extent the old telco model in order to meet their logistics and communications and particularly data needs. So there is a huge value to be unlocked in everything to do with data, the communication and processing of that data. But that is why I spoke a lot about edge computing. We see that there are various models for edge computing, which is cloud moving out to the edge, where the data is processed, whether it's either produced, but certainly processed and shall we say, consumed or used. And this is where I really would tackle the question. It is that if conventional, traditional, vertically designed MNOs keep to that old model, then there will be new players and it will not be them. But we know from talking with them that the European MNOs see this and they are already adapting to change. Given the infrastructure that they already have in the ground, including, of course, massive investments in 5G backhaul, they will actually be the best placed to be the providers of what we're calling telco edge, which, as well as their 5G networks, if they have edge nodes distributed along that network, they will also be able to meet what would be huge demand from enterprise, from industry applications, including all of the IoT work. So I don't think we're being over optimistic when we say that this is a new opportunity for the MNOs, but it is also a huge opportunity for European industry in general.
Thank you, Piers. And just in the context of that sort of expanding provider market and the role of private networks as you've described there, how is that being reflected in the future policy roadmap?
Well, that's exactly what, when I spoke about the digital decade and review of the 5G action plan, that is the reflection that we're engaged in at the moment. But in fact, it doesn't take an awful lot of reflection on the policy roadmap to do this. We're in implementation mode, as I think I've described. What has been missing is not the policy. What has been missing has been the investment opportunities and the ability to give comfort to the investor community, as well as the MNOs or others who would do so. But the objectives have always been there. The technology is certainly developing, and now we just have to go out there and do it.
Thank you. And I think one final question before we move on to the first panel session. There was a question from the audience about spectrum assignment, and I'm sure this will come up in the subsequent panels, but do you want to say something about that, the progress towards awarding all of the Pioneer spectrum?
Well, it will be the subject of more detailed conversation in this conference, and I welcome that. It's very important that we get this out in the open. So I will just limit myself to saying that there has been progress, but not enough. And even if, as I started sort of from the top line of the 5G action plan, we are not on schedule to meet our targets for the 5G action plan if the member states do not speed up the licensing, the authorization of the Pioneer bands. We're just past the sort of the 1/3 mark, if it's possible to measure that in percentage terms, and that is just not good enough, because we have rollout objectives starting in 2020, and we need to have completed that in the next 3 years. And clearly there are going to be problems provided for providers unless the spectrum is fully available.
Thank you, Piers. And as you say, I'm sure that will come up in the remainder of the discussions today and tomorrow. So thank you again. It's lovely to see you. Dan, could I ask you to bring up the panelists for the first session? In fact, while Dan is doing that, I'm just going to introduce that first session. So as Piers has described, a number of important initiatives taking place from the European Commission. The purpose of this first session is to talk about Europe's 5G action plan. As Piers has indicated, revisiting the action plan is on the agenda currently. Just to set this into context, the 5G action plan was adopted in 2016. It set out several targets for Europe's initial 5G deployment, and that included putting certain spectrum bands into the market, 700 megahertz, mid-band spectrum, and 26 gigahertz. But the 5G action plan also looked at initial deployment of 5G and set targets for initial coverage and achieving urban and transport path coverage by 2025. So the objective was to deploy initial 5G services by 2020 and then to achieve certain coverage objectives by 2025. Obviously, within the 5G action plan, there was discussion about the sort of reality of the 5G business case and the fact that use cases include consumers who use mobile broadband, but also businesses who require the sort of full capability of 5G beyond that initial 5G deployment. So I think where we sit against those current targets and how we see the priorities moving forward is very much what we're going to be talking about in this panel session this morning. So we have panelists who are very well equipped to be able to discuss this with us this morning. We have starting with our first panelist, we have Peter Stuckman from the European Commission. We have Michael van Billingham, who is the chair of BIPT and also the chair of BEREC. We have Marit Palavorita, who is Director of Regulatory Affairs at ETNO, Arti Holla from the European Satellite Operator Association, and then finally Tobias Martinez Gemino, who is the CEO of Cellnet, and I believe is speaking to us today as the chair of the European Wireless Infrastructure Association. So welcome everybody. Our panelists will be making some introductory comments, and then there will be opportunity for the audience to ask questions. So if I can ask our first panelist, Peter, to make your presentation, please. Thank you.
Good morning, dear colleagues. Thanks for Jeanette. And yeah, really a pleasure to add some thoughts on top of Piers, who already said a lot, of course. Indeed, so we get letters, we get calls. It's 2021. Where is the new 5G action plan? You announced it last year in February. And yeah, so as Piers said, in between we got a pandemic, and we adopted this next generation EU plan with 750 billion and 150 billion euros for digital. that is, of course, a very important new element. It brings us, of course, now in delivery mode, in implementation mode that we really have to address now. As Piers just put it, let's get on with it. And this has to be spent rather fast. So we're really in this operational mode. But then we also had the State of the Union address from the President last September and the Council calling for this digital compass. So this is now coming up in the next 3 weeks, so beginning of March. And yeah, we can see it as saying, okay, we get this recovery challenge now. We want to make sure that this investment is forward-looking and brings Europe back in terms of growth and jobs, and make it future-proof. Think sustainability, think Green Deal. And for that, of course, we also need the vision where we want to go. So that's more the compass, so the 2030 targets that we will be looking forward to seeing in March. And then the call it trip to go there. That's the digital decade. So the actions that we need to approach and to reach these targets. So 5G will certainly be in there. So you could in principle call it a mini 5G action plan. Of course, it won't be as detailed on 5G. It will be much more in context and broad. And the bad news is, of course, I can't tell you now what's in this communication. But of course, I'm happy to share some thoughts with you. So first, the question we could ask, if you would do a review of a 5G action plan 2016, what happened since then? Of course, as I said, we have in the middle of the pandemic, we have seen that digital is important, probably more than we thought before. So really to keep get business continuity, to keep our societies running. And from that, we can also, of course, discuss the potential for the future. So the potential for forward-looking investments, for growth opportunities, especially for SMEs that we now really need in the context of the recovery, and also the sustainable growth, so greening our sectors. What else was new? So then we have we didn't address in very much detail in 2016 the cybersecurity element, as we discussed already in recent conferences. And last year we saw the cybersecurity tool, the 5G cybersecurity toolbox adopted by the group of member states in cooperation with the Commission. And this debate already started before, so we have it since 2019. For us, still, 5G has to be rolled out fast, but of course, it has to be secure. There's no way around it. It's not just an option. We need security basically to trust these networks, in particular if we want to do these critical things that we just mentioned in the opening, for industries, for safety, and so on. So this clearly has to be fully implemented now. So the question in the context of this kind of investment agenda of digital decade or 5G action plan would be how best to do this. And we already hinted some ideas on transition in the communication accompanying the toolbox, where we said, okay, we have to take this opportunity now to go forward ambitiously, to make the network secure and advance the technologies, basically. For example, think about standalone core networks, that we move to these secure infrastructures possibly even earlier. So really accelerating make it an acceleration story. And for that, with this transition ideas, we hinted, and we of course discussing with the member states, that we don't have to probably do this transition within a couple of months, but the landing point will be important, that when we come to this secure or critical services, that we then have this secure infrastructure in place. And of course, a lot of decisions on vendor choices, on vendor strategies of the operators is now the right time to do, because the massive investments are now expected in the next few years. Another important development, if you look back to the old action plan, the 2016 one, is the verticals, so the industry aspect. It was not so much in the focus at that time. And of course, we know all the opportunities. in terms of digitizing our economic sectors, and 5G will be an important basis. And yeah, what we need to do now is, of course, to sector by sector to include this, or let's area by area, like looking at manufacturing, looking at transport, at health, building up this ecosystem. So this is about cooperation. It's about regulatory innovation. Yeah, corridors. Piers mentioned it. This huge investment challenge, and probably don't need or don't want 4 infrastructures in parallel along all the highways and super high quality. So there we can think about network sharing, spectrum sharing, net neutrality, privacy. So all this we have to get right in this context. We need a single market approach, so we have to think cross-border. And this relates then back to the other toolbox that you might have heard about, this connectivity toolbox, where we have talking with member states to identify what we can do in spectrum cooperation, coordination, what we can do on deployment cost. And this is very pragmatic, and see what we can really do in terms of best practices to move this forward. And these are exactly the 2 points where we are a bit behind in the action plan. So one is the spectrum aspect that was mentioned before. So we're not even at 50%. We're around 50% for the easier, well, say the lower pioneer bands. That will be the first deployments, which is 700 for the wide coverage, and the mid band to get both coverage and capacity. And we are very much behind in the millimeter wave bands, where we see in Asia and US more movement. Of course, there we see the challenge. I mean, if you get the connection with these kind of hotspots, it's really amazing speed, and it can be a driver for very high-end apps and experience. But of course, you have to search a bit for it. In the moment, if you drive around cities in the US, it's not very broad. The other one is small cells. So if we're starting now counting in the 5G observatory, the base stations, we see that we're in the thousands in the moment. So it's just starting in Europe, while in Korea, for example, you have already 100 in the 100,000. So that's, of course, very impressive. So yeah, as Pierre said, we need investment. We have the money to spend, but we also need the private sector to take it up. So coming back to the question of digital decade, where do you want to go and how to do it? And I'm really looking forward to get input today. We still have some time to finalize the strategy. So always happy to get some last minute input from everyone. Okay, I got a bit over time, but happy to now hand over back to Janet and the panel.
Thank you, Peter. So don't go anywhere, because I'm sure we will have some questions for you. Could I ask Michelle now to make your introductory comments?
Sure. Thank you very much, Janet, and hello, everybody. It's great to be with you. We all know that connectivity has never been more important in our lives as today, and we also know that the continued need for enhanced connectivity will remain in the post-pandemic era too. That's why broadband network deployments need to keep pace with the fast-growing internet traffic, both on fixed and mobile networks. But as we speak, the European Union has only 44% of households benefit from VHCN connectivity. And regarding rural VHCN connectivity, the situation is even worse. It drops to 20% of households. So in these less densely populated areas where the economic incentives for standalone private investment just don't exist, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is stark. And for there are too many people across the EU without high-speed internet access, about 15%. Addressing the EU digital divide is pivotal to ensure that those people in rural areas will no longer be bypassed by the digital revolution. So in mid-2020, BEREC published a strategy for the coming 5 years, in which BEREC considered the impact of rapidly changing markets, new network technologies, and expected policy developments in this period, as well as the increasing cross-border nature of digital services. The objectives of the work program 2021 are aligned with this BEREC strategy 2021-2025, with a close focus on 3 high-level strategic priorities: promoting full connectivity, supporting sustainable and open digital markets, and empowering end users. A key policy objective for the coming 5 years for BEREC is promoting full connectivity in line with the European regulatory framework. This means prioritizing work that improves the general condition for the expansion and take-up of secure, competitive, and reliable high-capacity networks, both fixed and wireless, across Europe, while ensuring a smooth transition from legacy infrastructure. And in that regard, I need to emphasize that BEREC is not only focusing on issues related to 5G rollouts, such as coverage indicators or EMF, but also less visible aspects such as backhaul and copper switch off. So more network convergence is a prerequisite towards a well-functioning EU single digital market, because 5G is expected to create an ecosystem for technical and business innovation involving vertical markets and a broad range of digital services such as fixed wireless access. But as such, 5G will be the cornerstone for digital connectivity and a major driver of economic growth. But in order to ensure this development can take place, an appropriate regulatory framework needs to be in place as well. For instance, spectrum regulation, access regulation to ensure access to sites, infrastructure sharing, and so on. And of course, some hurdles related to connectivity don't fall under BEREC's purview. Nonetheless, it's important to have a better understanding of these aspects, such as EMF, to help BEREC to play its role. So learning from the health community and radiation authorities and cooperating with them could facilitate the way we can best promote together science-based exposure limits. So we are planning for that, a workshop on this issue in autumn. Compared to the other regions of the world, the European approach is a middle path that promotes competition and choice, as well as investment, and also a very lively cyber security debate. In terms of 5G deployment, EU compares reasonably well with the other leading countries. Things are in flux, and it's certainly not lagging significantly behind technically in comparison with the USA, China, and other Asian countries. But notwithstanding all what we have done to make it easier to build, maintain, and expand Europe's wireless and wireline networks, the gigabit society is still underway. We need to push ahead in 5G. And in that light, we are also looking forward to the Europe Digital Decade. This is linked to a clear commitment of member states to use the recovery funds on par with the green transition. 5G networks are indeed expected to be more efficient and use less energy compared to previous generations of mobile networks. And I'm happy to see that sustainability is also a red thread going through our work program from now on until the end of next year, stemming from a commitment from our members to work in this area and to develop an understanding on how to reduce the carbon footprint. And in backdrop of the connectivity recommendation, BEREC and NRAs are involved in the establishment of the connectivity toolbox together with other competent authorities in charge, such as RSPG. And in March, we will also adopt a position on the Broadband Cost Reduction Directive that will serve as an input for the Commission for its review. Because when we reduce the regulatory burdens on broadband deployment, we lower the costs of build-out, which increases the incentive to invest. BEREC will play a role in both instruments by exchanging national experiences and come up with a set of best practices. Through those exchanges, we strive for a harmonized EU-wide approach that will boost 5G deployment and take up as swift as possible. So these two initiatives are really a first turnaround towards the greening of telecom infrastructure and services. Just to finish with, taking a look at the direction of the telecom networks and investment, we should seize this historic opportunity to come together to use new regulatory approaches to improve the access to and the use of digital technologies for all its citizens. And now, perhaps more than ever, this is a key for fighting pandemics. I thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Janet.
Thank you very much for those words. And again, please stay as there will be questions. Could I ask our next panelist, please, Marit? Hello.
Hello. Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, everybody. So my name is Marit Palovirta, and I work for ETNO. So ETNO is representing a trade association representing the largest operators in Europe. And this is, of course, a key discussion for us with a view to the opportunities for our industry going forward. So if we reflect a bit on what has happened in the past year, so actually 5G has shifted from this kind of future vision to a very commercial market reality in many parts of Europe. And this happened in a fairly short space of time. So we have had 5G network launches in 18 countries in Europe in the course of 2020. And there were already some reflections vis-a-vis the action plan, the existing action plan. And of course, it is perhaps clear that the current numbers in terms of coverage and uptake don't meet exactly the targets that were set more than 5 years ago now. But I would like to argue that there has been still consistent progress with the whole 5G ecosystem. Sometimes perhaps slow progress, but consistent over the last year and the past couple of years. And of course, if I was to mention a few key developments from our point of view, the spectrum auctions, while there have been delays, we are now seeing that there are more and more countries that are going ahead with their spectrum auctions. Also, we've seen that there's a wider availability of devices and commercial offers for the consumer space now available. Industrial use cases are coming up to life in many vertical sectors, and we heard that verticals, of course, and industry plays a key role in terms of uptake for 5G services. And also there's this increasing discussion about the role of 5G in the green agenda. So it's also very exciting for us to be part of the green transition and to find also the parallels between the digital and the green agenda. Peter also mentioned the 5G cybersecurity toolbox. This is key. And as well, then we've had a confirmation, let's say, from ICNIRP, the agency under WHO, on the standards for EMF and the updated recommendations, which give us then confidence to continue deployment of 5G. However, there's not only been, of course, good things in the past year, but we've also seen the pandemic playing a key role, and this has also impacted our sector directly. And we've seen also an increase in the kind of geopolitical tension, especially as it concerns cybersecurity, that has then caused some uncertainty in the vendor market and also some delays. So I would like to provide you with a few numbers on the current state of 5G. So ETNO, we launched a couple of weeks ago our annual State of Digital report, and I'll give you here some feeling from our side where we are in terms of 5G. So 5G coverage is still quite localized in most parts of Europe, and according to our numbers, it stood at about 24% of the population in September 2020. Now, in terms of uptake, the 5G networks only accounted for about 1.3% of total mobile connections in 2020. However, this is expected to go up to about 7% in the course of this year. But the key thing to note here is that there's already a kind of gap between the availability and coverage of 5G and then the uptake. And I would like to also then, in terms of the current status, to say a few words about the pandemic and the impact. So as I already said, it has had an impact on the business side of things for the telecommunications sector. But also then, of course, we've seen a very prompt reaction from our policymakers in order to try and relieve the situation. And there are some good things and some more negative things. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I would like to raise a few top of mind consideration from our side. So of course, it's a very good thing that digital communications have really been at the heart of trying to get us through this health pandemic. And by and large, communications are now considered an essential service and have become certainly more prevalent also in the mind of politicians and industry influencers, etc. We have seen significant raises in volumes of mobile data traffic across the board in the member states. And you might think that this has been a very positive development for the telecommunications sector. It has, of course, but in terms of revenues, the impact has been quite limited. So we all know that the telecommunication services for the consumer segment, of course, rely largely on flat retail rates. So the pricing structures are quite rigid, and hence we haven't seen the immediate impact, which could have enabled us to perhaps increase the ability to invest. Also, of course, there are general pressures in terms of general spending power due to the economic downturn. Having said all that, so there are challenges in the business environment, but I would like to note very importantly that the overall investment in connectivity increased in 2020. And I think I would also very much agree with what Piers said in his initial remarks, in that 5G still remains a huge opportunity for operators in Europe. And we are certainly working very hard in terms of going after it. I also mentioned the policy landscape. So there have been these delays in terms of spectrum licenses and also deployment at the local level. But we would very much like to applaud the European Commission as well and other public authorities for the efforts that they have made in terms of a prompt policy response. So a lot of good things happened during the year, and there is the recovery package now that is taking shape, and also tools such as the EU Connectivity Toolbox will be crucial to address the current issues that we're facing in the field. I'm also very excited about the EIB study that you mentioned regarding the demand side policies. So we are looking forward to going through that and seeing what is in the report. So just in terms of giving a few kind of policy priorities from our side towards whether it's then the 5G action plan or perhaps the digital decade, as you said that this will be framing the whole discussion for the few years. We still feel that streamlining spectrum practices across Europe is key. So there is still little consistency, and in many countries, this is still hampering deployment and the rollout of 5G. There are also still hurdles existing in terms of deployment of infrastructure, so permit granting, availability of sites. It's not evident when we are starting to move to the rollout phase. And also we need to make sure that we are making the most of the resources and the know-how that we actually have in the European telecommunications sector. So network sharing, RAN sharing to roll out 5G could be a significant way to reduce costs and to increase efficiencies. At the same time, increased cooperation within our sector, within the telecommunications sector, could be a key enabler for innovation and to actually develop 5G services. So we are again very excited that both Piers and Peter referred to both the competition policy aspects, but also then the research money and the efforts that are going towards innovation from the European policy side. Cybersecurity remains key, and we've seen that EU member states have adopted practices that differ greatly in some parts of Europe from the European attempted harmonization. So we would like to call for more harmonization and certainty over the cybersecurity measures, as of course new networks and the 5G rollout would benefit greatly from harmonized environment. And finally, just a word on the demand side policies and targets. So 5G indeed, it's not a one-way street or one-way track. So we need also demand in order to have a sustainable ecosystem and sustainable markets for 5G. And as I said already, so we are very happy to see that now this is also being recognized by our policymakers. So industry verticals play a key role, and we certainly are making an effort from the operator side to pilot and to try and find the new killer apps, if you would like. Also, public administrations and SMEs can play a key role in this respect. So very much looking forward to this discussion. And I think that in whatever shape that the future policy recommendations will come, we should think about the full ecosystem and to make sure that any future targets that we set are then measuring the ecosystem and are our common targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marit, for those comments on behalf of ETNO. Could I ask then our next panelist, so Arti Holla, who is representing the European Satellite Operators Association.
Thank you, Jeanette. I'm really delighted to be part of this panel, and I just wanted to say, you know, it was my first day back in the office yesterday, and for me it's the new year still, so happy new year to everybody. To get into the subject, I don't want to talk too much about what satellite is doing in 5G, because I think by now people are really well aware that release 17 from 3GPP will contain specs around new radio and NB-IoT, both to support satellite. And studies for 5G backhaul over satellite will also hopefully move to the normative work items as well. And at the same time, our members are collaborating with different players on relevant services that either validate the technology or somehow show the potential of integrated solutions, whether it's with MNOs for connected and automated vehicles, whether it's chipset manufacturers for IoT, partnering on cloud computing, etc. And I'm sure everybody knows that there are a lot of new satellite systems coming up as well. So all these activities are really driven organically as the different players see synergies and opportunities for their businesses. And it really gives a meaning to the network of networks for 5G that the Commission has pioneered, and which Commissioner Breton now has underscored with his initiative on an EU constellation for secure connectivity. So to my mind, the role of satellite in 5G and beyond is not in question. But what I do want to highlight is that the Commission stands before a huge opportunity now. There are various legislative initiatives which are being reviewed, the 5G Action Plan, subject of this session, but also the Radio Spectrum Policy Programme and the Broadband Guidelines for State Aid as well. And I think all of these are relevant to the digital decade communication, you know, moving towards 2030. And we know the intention is good because the narrative is around the network of networks and the secure constellation as well, and even spectrum policy. So far, the narrative has been a holistic one. It includes different technologies, including satellite, and satellite not just because it's required for inclusion, but also because we know it's required to enable seamless 5G services, as well as secure data transmission with quantum. But what I think is really important for us to remember now is that we are living at a time when millions of European citizens desperately need to see their lives improved. And if 5G is a major pillar of European digital policy, then it has to do that too. In 2013, Europe's target was basic broadband for all, but we missed it. Then it became 30 megabit per second for all by 2020, and we've missed that too. And now it's 100 megabit per second, upgradable to 1 gigabit by 2025. And it might even go higher with the new communication. Who knows? But if bringing 5 million European citizens basic broadband is too great a challenge, then how can member states justify investments, or how can companies justify investments to achieve even higher 5G targets? So I reiterate, the Commission stands before an opportunity to reset, to not pick up where we left off before the pandemic, but to learn the lessons of what we've all just been through. So for me, the Commission needs to ensure that Europe builds back better. What I'm saying is that a revised 5G action plan needs to be ambitious, but in a new way. With the pandemic, the strains on economies, competing government priorities, unemployment, and so on, it needs to be far more specific about how to deliver services to all, not just the urban elite. If we want to enable 5G services like mobile healthcare through connected vehicles, or teleworking models because they're greener and they're actually healthier for many people, and most importantly, if we want an inclusive society, because now more than ever before, we have really felt the effects of isolation and the effects of disparity between the haves and the have-nots. then we really cannot just define actions to support higher and higher and higher speeds. We have to call for actions that raise the connectivity level across the board. And that cannot be just measured by how many 5G devices are on the market or in how many cities have MNOs rolled out. It needs to be measured in terms of everyday people seeing transformational changes in connectivity. And if this is what we want to achieve, then we need a consistent approach across different initiatives. It cannot be that on the one hand, we define 5G as a network of networks with targets of connecting everyone, but on the other hand, when it comes to implementation, we make investment rules for white areas that follow a binary approach based on definitions that exclude certain technologies. That happened in the past with the state aid broadband guidelines, which referred to wired network next generation access. And it risks happening again if in the future they refer to very high capacity networks, which, just like the definition all those years ago, excludes satellite. The problem with that kind of a binary reference, which is based on speeds and latency, is that it is a one-size-fits-all approach. And that is not appropriate for different 5G use cases. You might well need 150 megabit per second and sub 25 millisecond latency for some applications like virtual reality, augmented reality, and gaming, but you certainly don't need it for all. So video streaming over Netflix, which has been a savior for so many people during lockdown, or cloud computing, they need good capacity, but they're not necessarily latency sensitive. And other applications that we all really depend on, like email, web browsing, they don't even require that high capacity. So if investment rules are linked to binary definitions, then they don't relate to real user needs. They will have the effect of excluding available solutions that can provide services that people really do need. And they won't be consistent with the idea of a network of networks. So in other words, a binary approach would be too absolute and it becomes artificial. So rather than pushing binary targets, we believe the 5G Action Plan should call member states to take actions that drive meaningful connectivity. And I wanted to tell you that in 2020, I participated in a partnership dialogue for connectivity with the ITU, the World Bank, World Economic Forum, GSMA, Facebook, and others. And meaningful connectivity discussions started, as they always do, by trying to define what is the minimum speed that everybody should have. But very quickly, that group converged on an important statement. Governments should avoid the imposition of unnecessary speed and latency obligations that could result in excluding vital connectivity solutions for areas where today there are none and that are not required for all broadband applications. This statement was agreed in a global context, and it really is a recognition of reality in all countries, including European member states. And that has to be kept in mind for a 5G action plan. So in conclusion, I would say that the review of the 5G action plan should reset expectations in view of lessons learned from the pandemic. We absolutely need consistency between narrative and policy, which means that if 5G is really a network of networks that enables secure, reliable, seamless, high-quality connectivity and services, then the spectrum policy has to fully respect the long-term role of each technology and ensure certain and unfettered access for each one. DG Connect really needs to make sure that state aid policies support the hybrid network approach that they are calling for and do not endorse a binary VHCN, very high capacity network approach. It can't be we all agree the future is converged, but when it comes to investment, we only support criteria based on specific technologies. Definitions need to be nuanced to reflect real services that users should benefit from and the range of speeds that can deliver them. Frankly, every European citizen should see that his or her needs, digital needs, will be met by that action plan. And finally, it means encouraging member states to invest in technologies like satellite that can deliver meaningful connectivity of between 50 and 100 megabit per second as standalone or integrated solutions, because these are vital to transform lives, extend 5G services, and enhance the resiliency of all digital networks. I'm going to end with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Artie. Thank you very much for those comments. So the final panelists before we move on to questions, Tobias Martinez Gimino from the European Wireless Infrastructure Association. Tobias, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank you all Forum Europe team for having invited us here. As the chairman of the European Wireless Infrastructure Association, I can say that it is a pleasure for us to share with my panelist colleagues and with all the audience our views. Since the hard lockdown last spring, we have seen how telecom networks have been able to manage the massive traffic increase with almost no problems. This is due to the big investments that the telecom sector have been doing since a year to provide connectivity throughout Europe. Meanwhile, Europe is working hard on its recovery strategy, making available a huge funds program and unprecedented recovery in the last 70 years. The European Commission proposed a major recovery plan for Europe based on harnessing the full potential of the European Union budget to help repair the economic and social damage brought by the coronavirus pandemic. Quick start European recovery and protect and create jobs. The recovery funds will help member states to address the economic and social impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, whilst ensuring that their economies undertake the green and digital transitions, becoming more sustainable and resilient. We envisage that the ambition that Europe emerge as a leader in 5G in the gigabyte society is still in place, and Europe is setting the strategy through the recovery plans. Today, I am happy to be here representing EBIA, the European Trade Association for Independent Wireless Infrastructure Operators. We are 10 members operating across 14 European countries, and it is always good when an industrial sector work together for a greater benefit. EBIA members facilitate access to wireless services and help decrease the digital divide, providing better coverage and wireless services to more people doing what we are experts on, which is managing infrastructures. Greater outsourcing would release significant levels of capital to the telecom operators for investment in new technologies like 5G and future rollouts. Namely, 28 billion euros could be unlocked if outsourcing to independent players grew from 17 to 30 to 50%. So, what does Europe need for improving its connectivity? Well, we do believe three main topics. First, it's about densification, more towers, more infrastructures. The second one is about a fast rollout and time to market of enabling technologies like 5G. And the third, it's about funding, it's about money. And what does EBIA bring to the ecosystem? Well, the first one, it's about shared wireless infrastructure. The second one is about quick and open access. And the third one, it's about long-term investment with an industrial commitment. Next slide, please. Let me go more in deep on the number one. Number one is about shared wireless infrastructure. Europe needs more infrastructure for 5G and to ensure that 4G and other technologies are available everywhere. Infrastructure is a very down-to-earth business. Where there are no towers, we build them, helping to overcome white spots and well as enabling a better rural connectivity, which means breaking the digital divide. By sharing and mutualizing our infrastructures among the different customers, we ensure a better and more efficient use of resources, like soil or energy. and thus a more sustainable activity, less carbon intensive, less impacting from visual perspective, and increasingly aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Number 2 is about quick and open access. 5G will be driven by telecom operators, of course, but also by vertical sectors and IoT businesses. Whatever the emerging actors, the neutral host infrastructure sharing model is applicable, and indeed the independent infrastructure already supports dozens and other wireless networks apart from the 3 or 4 national telecom operators in every country. Independent neutral host infrastructure facilitates competition and allows all players to access the infrastructure easily and quickly. Sharing infrastructure results in fewer barriers to entry or expansion. This encourages smaller wireless operators and innovative new applications, and these reduce the time to market. Moreover, the challenge in the 5G era is not just about towers. Delivering fiber-connected small cells, dedicated infrastructure in buildings and factories, and niche infrastructure to unlock connectivity on transport routes, as well as distributed data centers for edge computing or backhauling and fiber to the tower, are all areas where neutral host can lead the way. Let me go to approach the third benefit. It's about the long-term investment. Trying to imagine a 5G network capable to cope with all opportunities we are only envisaging is not an easy task. Let the society imagine and create. However, there is one certainty: 5G demands funding. And Europe is preparing to push forward its recovery plan alongside of the review of the 5G action plan and its neutral industrial strategy. But to succeed in the middle of and after the pandemics, private investment will be needed, and for sure, EVA members have a role to play here. Identifying independent wireless infrastructure as a key part of the new industrial strategy allowed to access different sources of funds, complementary to those going to the telecom sector, which is already challenged to finance technology and service deployments. New spectrum license and increased coverage obligations. There are different ways of revealing the value of infrastructure, but after a series of telecom operators-led carve-outs, the most recent deals confirm that the neutral host model, which is prevailing in other regions, is competitive and appreciated by the telecom operators and telecom actors in Europe as an enabling arm for the whole sector. And now let me share some conclusion remarks. As European Union member states look to promote increased investment in wireless infrastructure over the coming years, we will face many policy debates in our domain. It is therefore absolutely critical for EVA as a valuable partner for the European Union institutions engage with decision makers to help them understand our business model and to unlock the full potential of our sector for the deployment of future wireless infrastructure and for the rollout of 5G technology across Europe. In this regard, we are quite sure that any further regulatory initiatives will recognize the pro-competitive nature of independent tower costs, and the European Electronic Communication Code does. We are hopeful that future policy will reflect and indeed support wider and faster infrastructure deployment through neutral host investment in the development of European telecom policy. We would like the European Union regulatory framework to view EWIA as a valuable partner in the European Union connectivity debate. Appropriate policy incentives could lead to significant additional investment in Europe. So, in a nutshell, we are here as an industry to partner with our customers and with public administrations to build a connected Europe and to help overcome any clue of digital divide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tobias. So we are moving into the discussion part of this panel session. Just while everybody rejoins the stage and while you gather your thoughts, could I just very briefly summarize the key areas that you have all mentioned that might need to be focused on when we revisit the 5G action plan? So spectrum policy is one area. So streamlining was mentioned, harmonizing, speeding up access to spectrum. Coverage was mentioned by several of you, and the importance of connectivity for all and universal access. The competitive landscape has been mentioned in various discussions, evolution to standalone architectures, Open RAN, use case diversity, and achieving that transition, if you like, from the initial 5G mobile broadband-based deployments into a full 5G capability, environmental issues, sustainability agenda, cybersecurity. Those were just a very brief summary of all of the issues that we've discussed. We will go into questions now. There's a few questions for the audience, from the audience. So the first question, I think, Michelle, is for you. The question is, will BEREC be formalizing its position on Open RAN?
Yes, thank you very much, Janet. Open RAN will not be dealt as such. It's not foreseen in our work program for this year. But of course, we are looking to it, and this is certainly something you can put on the agenda during our next stakeholder forum on the 1st of April for the next year's work program, of course. Thank you, Janet. Over to you.
Thank you. And Michelle, while you're there, we have another question for you also for BEREC. And it's just in relation to the Green Deal and the proposal from the Commission relating to the Green Deal. How will BEREC contribute to more sustainability? And just thinking about the environmental focus and adding that into your work streams.
Thank you again, Janet. Well, we are contributing in that both internally and internally as an organization, and to see what can be the best practices within the NRAs to reduce our own food carbon free as an organization, but also externally we have a kind of study to help us to have an impact on the whole telecommunications sector, digital sector, but this will be most probably for next year as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'd like to open up discussion now and just bring in all of the panelists. So as I mentioned, there was a number of key areas that you all mentioned that might need to be revisited. Before we go into those specific areas, I just wondered if we could talk a little bit about the sort of framework, if you like, for the 5G action plan. So a comment has come in from the audience that the initial 5G action plan was target specific. So we had targets about spectrum being available at a particular point in time. We had targets for coverage to be available at different points of time. Is the Commission planning to continue with that specific target focus approach is one question. And I think for the rest of the panelists as well, should the Commission continue with that target-specific approach, or if not? And Artie, I think you sort of alluded to this in your discussion as well. You know, how should we be moving forward? So, Peter, do you want to start off with that question?
With pleasure, Janet. Yeah. So yeah, as Piers and me mentioned this morning, so we're set for another round of targets. So in the digital decade, we will certainly see some. That doesn't mean that we're only looking in targets. I mean, it's also about what to do about it. That's all about the action plan. I think the targets have been useful, though the fact that we didn't reach everything is also a sign that we were ambitious and that we're not just doing this as a lip service and say, okay, we will meet them anyway. So it's really putting this policy ambition, and it's also interesting to set investment agendas. Also for the private sector and the public sector. So this, and it's led to also a lot of momentum with the member states, for example, when this 5G roadmap that was adopted, so that everyone committed at least to go forward, to have a planning for the spectrum. Then, of course, it's not so easy always to free up bands. We're aware of that. We're pushing, but we know that it's sometimes a challenge. So we're seeing that things are not as we hoped to meet the deadlines, but Marit mentioned and others that we indeed seeing movements and hopefully getting there, at least for the low and mid band for 5G, which are so important, at least for the first phase now. So in that sense, I think it's important to set these ambitions, and I saw also many comments here in the chat on the green aspect. So on that side, indeed, we have two dimensions also for the targets that could be interesting. One is, of course, to greening the sectors through the use. So that's where do we want to go there? And also then, of course, doing our homework as a sector and saying, where do we, what about the footprint that Michelle mentioned? And really making networks more energy efficient with 5G, but then also with future technologies.
Thank you, Peter. So thank you very much for that. So Marit, I wondered if I might come to you and your reaction on what you've heard and what Peter has just said as well.
Yeah, so I do agree with Peter in that targets, they serve a purpose. So there's a political purpose, and it's also good to have a kind of a common measurement, if you like, to measure ourselves against. And also we have, as a sector, nothing against ambitious targets, as I think as we are kind of pursuing a global digital leadership, or if we would like to be pursuing that, then we need to be ambitious with our targets. There are, a couple of kind of notes from our side, though. So, of course, it is not only purposeful, and I think Artie was referring to that, to only measure the connectivity or coverage. I was trying to highlight, and I think many others as well, that the whole 5G development, it's an ecosystem. It is not just about connectivity. Yes, connectivity is the foundation, but we need to also think about the demand side, for example, and perhaps there is some room, instead of just measuring connectivity, to see how we could also then measure progress with whether it's SMEs or education or healthcare in terms of their digital preparedness. Because otherwise, if we don't have this kind of sustainable business case for 5G, we will not be getting very far with the investment, and we will be continuing to see the kind of slow progress. And I also would like to highlight, of course, that it would be key that we agree on the targets together. So that is not only the policymakers setting targets, but we actually have the discussion and take the time to have the discussion on these targets, so that we can then also see how every stakeholder fits into the equation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Artie, just coming back to you, just first of all, some feedback. There was a comment from the audience. It was very good to hear your presentation and talking about technology diversity, business model neutrality, and bringing in satellite, not just 5G, but also the satellite and other wireless technologies, etc., all being important. So that was just some feedback on your comments. Do you want to say something else about what you've heard from Peter there, and how you think we should focus moving forward in the action plan?
Yeah, I think it's been good, some of the comments that we've seen. And I think the one which strikes me most is this point about we should be measuring impact. We should be focusing on impact. And I think, when the satellite industry comments on targets, the perception is, well, obviously you're going to comment on that because satellite struggles to meet this or this target, be it latency, be it something else. But it's really not about that. Look, we're hosting a showcase on connected automated vehicles later in the day. And in preparing for that yesterday, Telefonica was saying we really need satellite because without it, we will never get the approvals to bring automated vehicles for healthcare, for logistics, for so many of the 5G ambitions on the road, because we can't transfer half of that data to the insurers, for instance. So it's fundamental. It's not. So that means that this binary approach, which is numbers based, doesn't work because you can't capture the hybrid networks concept. I know it's hard. I know. I don't envy Peter's job at all in having to try to capture that, but we have to find a way of doing it.
Thank you. And Michelle, you mentioned in your discussion the more network convergence as being important. You also mentioned deployment barriers and sort of trying to remove some of the regulatory burdens the regulatory barriers. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yes, but I mentioned our forthcoming opinion on the review of the BCRD directive, which will be adopted next month. And so just to give you a first flavor on the main topics we've been through, of course, there is an important alignment to be made with the new regulatory framework, being the European Electronic Communications Code. There are also different elements which are not mandatory yet and which could be mandatory to help. And the way the single information point is working quite well, although there is still room for improvement to speed up the process and also for granting the building permit. Just to give you a very quick overview. Over to you, Janet.
Thank you very much. So we have a question from the audience about how do we make 5G and the 5G ecosystem and investment? How do we really make that a game changer for European economy and society? So how do we unlock this value that we've been talking about? Can I have some views on that? Who wants to start? Peter, would you like to say something?
If no one else wants to kick off, I can share some thoughts. It's an interesting one. Indeed, that fits in with what Pierre said in the morning. I mean, we have now, of course, these funds. We have to get them out quickly. And at the end, it only flies if the private sector also, and the public sector as well, sees these are valid concepts to go ahead to invest in. And of course, it's public money, and we also have a duty to invest this in a way that is sustainable and gives returns and benefits for society. So in that sense, I think it's very much about cooperation first, to say to a multi-stakeholder approach, looking at the different interests, bringing the stakeholders together. That's also our role, but also role of associations and other players. And then ecosystem by ecosystem, see who is ready to take roles. We do this in these strategic deployment agendas where we have tried to define this common vision, and then also develop roadmaps, where to start priority deployments. And then, of course, behind that, enabling the regulatory environment. We have the telecom code that has a number of things on co-investment there, and we have to get this right also now at national level when we implement, as well as the guidance that we could put on top. And we have the toolbox work now on the connectivity, where we see what are the best practices, and then really also set the framework to unlock that. And state aid, Piers mentioned it, if we're now thinking about the spending of these huge funds, there needs also to be some understanding what are the projects that would bring a step change. address market failures where we can invest from a public side. So this we're also working on with the stakeholders, with the colleagues in the Commission, to find a very good and pragmatic approach to these kind of funding.
Thank you. So Tobias, I think you wanted to say something, and then Artie.
Yeah, thank you. Now, on top of Peter's words, fully agree. I think it's a great opportunity for cooperation from public sector and private sector. This is not just about public fundings or private funding. So we are facing, I think, a tipping point. So we are in a very critical situation today as a European citizens, as a Europe as a whole. We have to compete at the end of the day, and this is not just about, let me say, coverage in terms of population. It's also about, geographically speaking, it's also a challenge, and this is about cooperation and transformation. So we are facing a very, very critical situation on which Europe have to face and have to invest. And partnering with other players like other type of infrastructure like satellites or other type of infrastructure, but also obviously with all of the telecom operators is in our opinion as a European Wireless Association is the unique way to compete, because it's about competition as well in front of Asia or States. So again, I think we have different DNAs. We are huge investors. We are capital-intensive companies. We are long-term runners, and I think we should take advantage of the different profiles of the different type of players we have in Europe today. And well, again, for us, it's more an opportunity than a threat. But just is an opportunity if we work together with more partnering attitude.
Thank you. And of course, there's more to come after the break in the next session about recovery strategy and investment vehicles. So I think, Tobias, your comments there about partnering and the different investment opportunities are well made there. Artie, you had a comment, I think.
Yeah, you asked about the question on whether the development of 5G technology standards for cellular networks would really be a game changer. And I do think that the standardization work is really important. Satellite is inherently involved in that. And the new radio work, so the RAN work, for example, I'm learning that that's really important for hybrid modems. So it's not just about the mobile phone being able to talk to a satellite and stuff like that. It's also for eSIMs, for vehicles on the move, and so on. But I read a document the other day from the 6G channel, and it said 6G could be the first mobile radio generation truly aiming to close the digital divide. Now, initially, when I read that, I kind of laughed, but then I wondered whether the mindset behind that statement is that because in the next 5 years or roughly, maybe the standards will actually already be there, ready for implementation, so that we can really roll out the integrated solutions, which 5G has been outlining and setting as its targets, but is not yet achieving. So just wanted to share that.
And just, not wanting to add to Peter's long list of priorities here, but Artie, do you think that area that you've just mentioned, is that something you would like to see as part of the Commission's thinking moving forward? So sort of trying to push forward to make sure that the latest 3GPP features are progressed in a timely way, are implemented, are available to be deployed, etc.?
Definitely, we care a lot about the 5G backhaul work. We care about the NB-IoT work. I have members who care deeply about the new radio work. We support all of that, but it's not a question of waiting for that, because there is so much that can be done now with existing satellite systems already, and there's so many examples amongst the membership that show that. But yeah, we fully support the work as well.
Thank you. And there's another question that we'll come back to in a minute from the audience, but just to probe a bit more on what we've been discussing about the sort of demand and supply side dependencies. So Marit, I think you mentioned this yourself. So obviously, on the one hand, we've got a clear business cases needed for investment in the latest functionality, etc. And there's demand needed for that. But on the demand side, is there potentially a barrier that for some of the emerging sectors of 5G use, that they almost want to see that capability demonstrated before they can confirm that they will adopt it? And I just wondered, is there a sort of barrier there on the adoption side? How do we move forward with investment, but also give confidence to the demand side of the market that when the investment is made, that the capability actually does what they want it to do?
Yeah, so I think this is part of the ongoing work, actually, that we as operators, our members, are doing at the moment. So if we look at, for example, the industry verticals, I think in Europe we talk a lot about the verticals, and that's the expectation is that the verticals will actually be a critical player for the uptake of 5G. So yes, there will be a consumer segment as well, but verticals, they are a current focus, of course. And there is often this, in the press, you might think that there's no collaboration at all, but there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, if you like, between operators and the different verticals to create the kind of new 5G-enabled services and the business models and the contractual models, etc., to actually boost the business case for 5G. So I think it's really all about cross-sector collaboration on one hand, and I'm glad to say that operators are already doing this very much between different industry verticals, but also about then innovation. So we need to also innovate here. So 5G, of course, as a technology, it provides new capacities. So whether it's network slicing or other things, improved capacity, we now can then produce new types of services, which hopefully will then contribute towards the efficiency, etc., of our industry. But in order to innovate and in order for operators to actually dedicate resource for this innovation and collaboration, we need, of course, to have a solid kind of business model on the core business. And this is where I would like to back on the regulatory framework and the sustainable market. So in order to invest in the new business models and the work between the verticals, we need to make sure that the core business is also working and that, as Peter referred to, the code and the kind of baseline regulation, it's in good shape, because at the moment there are still limits on various things such as pricing, etc. So we need to make sure that we have enough, let's say, margins to then reinvest this for innovation and enable us, and which will hopefully then enable us as European operators to become even global digital players. And it's a complex ecosystem, so I think it's very difficult to pinpoint, but I think we should think about it as a kind of virtual circle. If we get many of these components right, I think we can get there.
Thank you, Marit. So back to you, Peter, I think, to solve that one. But if I can ask a specific question that's come from the audience on that point, or a related point. The question is from Stephen Pentland from Vodafone. With return on capital employed in the European telecom sector around about 4%, to what extent could a more predictable regulatory environment restore investors' confidence and also reduce the gap to be backfilled by state subsidies? So, Peter, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, that's also, of course, reflects what Marit just said. I mean, we have to do the best to really make this the framework for the investment as attractive as possible, and that's on the one hand implementation that we monitor very closely with the member states and now how it's also applied, the code. But we also try to look at the best practices, what we can do to have this more European perspective. So single market can be can help. Of course, when we say, okay, we want to see cross-border consolidation, that's not usually something that the telcos immediately would jump on. But of course, we're looking at both. We're also looking at easing the investment in the national markets. For example, we mentioned before network sharing, net neutrality to make this work for a 5G world. So yeah, so this both avenues. On the one side, I would say the code implementation. On the other side, what are the best practices where we can give additional guidance? These are the avenues that we currently exploring.
Thank you, Peter. So Forum Europe would like to wrap up the panel session shortly. So Artie, I think you want to just come back with one final comment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeanette. I'm seeing the question from Denek Vanicek on sovereignty and autonomy. And I think Commissioner Breton is right spot on when he says that Europe missed the first generation of the internet and doesn't want to miss the second one. And that I think goes to the core of the initiative on the secure constellation for the constellation for secure connectivity, and not wanting to miss the boat in terms of having European infrastructure that can secure that. Thanks.
I see some broad agreement with that. Any final comments from anybody? If not, I would just like to thank the panelists. There is more to come after the break on what we've been discussing, the Recovery Fund and investment in particular in the next session. So thank you, everybody, and I will hand back to Dan now from Forum Europe.
Jeanette, thank you very much. And yeah, I'd like to echo Jeanette's thanks to all of our panelists. A fantastic discussion and a great way to kick things off. So thank you all very much for that. Yeah, really good discussion. So thank you. And as Jeanette says, we are going to be continuing to look at a lot more of these issues in more detail as we work through the rest of the program today and of course tomorrow and Thursday. What we have coming up next, so we're now moving into a quick break, and following that, the next session is going to be looking at the EU recovery strategy and some of these funding opportunities and the role of 5G in recovery and, as I said, the funding and investment opportunities around that. So that's going to be coming up in around about 50 minutes or so. So we do have a break now, but what I would like to invite all of you to do now is to actually make use of the networking part of the platform. So as I mentioned at the start of the day, there's an area on the left-hand side of your menu bar. You can see a networking area there. That's going to be able to give you the opportunity to connect and to be matched up with other attendees on the platform. So for the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like to invite you all to please go and make use of that networking area. Click on the networking link and then click on the connect button. You'll be connected with somebody else who is on the platform and have an opportunity to chat with them, maybe discuss some of the issues that have been covered now, and choose whether to exchange contact details as well. So please do make use of that. And as I said, we will then be back here on the main platform in around about 50 minutes or so for session 2. So once again, thank you very much to Jeanette and to all of our panelists. Thank you to Piers for his introductory keynote presentation this morning. Enjoy the networking, and we'll see you back here in around about 50 minutes or so. Thank you very much.